around. Okay. Start. You ready? Start? Let's go. All right. Again, neither Ijaaz or Ibn Anwar heard me correct, and I'll say it's my fault I'm speaking fast, or if they did, they're misrepresenting me because they don't have reputation. I didn't say you had to subscribe to the opinion of Abu Amina Bilal Phillips. You're misrepresenting. I said the very fact there are Muslims who disagree with you, and the very fact there are Muslims who condemn you and you condemn them, is all the more proof. I don't care about your scholar. My scholar can beat your scholar. Go back to the Quran and the Sunnah, which you have yet to do. This is now what times you have yet to quote a single verse from the Quran, yet to quote a single verse from your Hadith, where someone other than Allah says He is the truth, He is the resurrection, He is the light, and someone other than Allah will raise the dead from their graves. You have yet to do that. So by that, you admit you have no refutation. Coming back to Ijaaz. Again, Ijaaz. When you tell me that Qurtubi think the Christians at that time were true believers, that's irrelevant to his exegesis of 61:14. When he interprets 61:14 and he knows this is supposedly addressed to Jesus in the 1st century and promising Jesus, his followers will be victorious, Al-Qurtubi has no choice but to look at the history to see who are those followers that were made victorious, and he has no choice because there are no other followers. Because all the documents that prevailed and disseminated throughout the world say it's Paul and Peter and John and Matthew. But he didn't reason out the implication, and he's avoiding the implication like you are. If they were the true followers and they were victorious, that means their message was true. And if their message is true, then God preserved it. Well, the message he preserved is the writings of the New Testament. And that's why it's still spreading like wildfire all over the world, which is why you're arguing tooth and nail against its veracity and against its statements, because you know this message exposes Islam and proves Jesus is God in the flesh. Now let me correct again your challenge to me. I don't know if you're referring to the Arabic versions of the Gospels not being extant in the 7th century. Even if you believe that, then that means you're not a Sunni, because according to Sahih Bukhari, volume 1, number 3, we know there was a Gospel in Arabic written by Waraqah bin Nawfal. So do you reject that? Well, I wouldn't blame you to reject it, because it comes over 100 years after the death of your prophet. Since you're Sunni, you are going to have to agree with your tradition. There were Gospels in Arabic, because Waraqah bin Nawfal wrote the Gospel in Arabic, and he would write it in Hebrew, which some say it meant Syriac. So why are you going against your sources? Just because we don't have any extant manuscript evidence doesn't mean none existed. But more than that, you don't need it to be in Arabic for the Gospels and the New Testament writings to be in circulation, because they could be in all the different languages. Even at the time of Muhammad, the Christians would have been reading Syriac. Syriac would have been the language they read. So I'm going to issue my challenge to you again. The copies of John in all the languages in the 7th century, especially to the Arabs, it doesn't have to be Arabic, in Syriac, in Coptic, you name it, did it contain the definite article before the festival, and didn't have the angel stirring the waters? In other words, the 7th century copies of John, did it have it? If it did, you're stuck with it. You have to admit it. You have to accept it, because your prophet said those are the uncorrupt words of God. Let me give you the verses real quickly to show you he was confirming those scriptures that existed at that time, not some scriptures that didn't exist, that we're just going to make up out of our imagination. Chapter 2 of the Quran, verses 40 to 44. Chapter 2 of the Quran, verses 89 to 91. Chapter 2 of the Quran, verse 97. Chapter 2 of the Quran, verse 101. Chapter 2, verse 113. Chapter 2, verse 121. Chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. Chapter 3, verses 113 and 114. Chapter 4, verse 47. Chapter 5, verses 43 and 48. Chapter 10, verse 37, verse 94. Chapter 12, verse 111. Chapter 46, verse 12 and verse 30. Game over. My Bible's uncorrupt, and you're bound to it. And Jesus is God.
Right.